Ethan Hale had once been a man of certainty. He grew up in a village church where the organ pipes seemed to breathe with the seasons, and his mother's voice hummed hymns while she kneaded dough. His earliest prayers were the soft, practical petitions of a child, for scraped knees to mend, for rain when the garden needed it, for his father to come home safely from late-night shifts. That faith, simple and steady, layered itself into every ordinary thing: the Sunday roast, the way neighbors greeted each other on the lane, the quiet thanksgiving he felt when a newborn nephew latched on for the first time. He carried that faith into adulthood as one carries a warm coat through winter. It fit him. It shaped his decisions. In the hospital waiting room during his daughter Clara's emergency surgery, it steadied his hands and warmed his face. In the boardroom when deals were tense, it kept him honest. People described Ethan as a man with a moral spine, someone whose word held weight. He volunteered at the food pantry, taught a Sunday school class when asked, and when his wife Anna was sick for months, he sat beside her bed and read psalms until his voice faltered at dusk. Then the years stacked grief upon grief. Anna's illness grew steady and cruel. Tests multiplied. Hope, once easy, felt frayed. The church, which had been a place of refuge, began to echo with words that sounded small beside the enormity of his loss. Anna died in the quiet dark of a September night. The town came together with casseroles and flowers, and for a while the ritual of people's kindness kept Ethan moving. But after the funeral, the calls grew less frequent. The meetings at the food pantry continued, but in him something closed, not like a slammed door, but like a window slowly fogging over until he could no longer remember the horizon. He read his Bible less. The prayers he once offered felt like scripts recited without feeling. In private, the questions rose like a tide: where is God in this? How could a loving father allow such pain? If God is there, why was he silent when Anna needed him? The answers he had held up all his life no longer satisfied. He began to suspect that faith had been a story adults used to make sense of things. Faith had protected him from the greater terror of meaninglessness. Without Anna's constant presence, without the anchor of shared worship and Sunday rituals, Ethan felt adrift. His withdrawal was not theatrical. He did not rage in pulpit or break the church windows. He simply stopped going. He stopped answering the calls of the people who had come with casseroles. He closed himself off gently, like someone who believes that grief is an illness best endured alone. He picked at the edges of his old life, kept his job for a while, then gave it up when the office felt like a theater where he could not remember his lines. He cut back on church events, on the community meals he used to help organize. And yet, the world around him did not stop being alive. Months later, a flood of small, persistent things began to prod at the fog in his heart. It was not one dramatic event, there was no sudden, cinematic conversion. It was a series of tiny, human mercies: a neighbor bringing him soup because he noticed his curtains were shut 2 days too many, a friend from his youth leaving a voice message, simple, non-demanding, reminding him that the church picnic was next Saturday, no pressure, just there if he wanted to come, a stray gray cat who adopted him and slept on his lap during the long afternoons. If faith was once a coat he wore unconsciously, these small mercies were like hands nudging him to wake. One rainy night, the kind of rain that turned streetlight halos into blurry moons, a young woman knocked on Ethan's door. She was trembling and soaked, her phone had died, she said, and she had nowhere to go. Her name was Mara. She was not from the town, she had driven through to see an ailing relative and her car had slid on the road. She had a hospital band still on her wrist, fear had made her voice thin. Ethan made tea, wrapped her in a spare blanket, and listened as she explained, haltingly, how she felt stranded. No sirens, no drama, just the small fact of being seen. That night, while Mara slept on his couch, Ethan sat in the kitchen and thought of Anna's hands. He thought of all the times the smallness of care had mattered: the nurse who adjusted Anna's pillow at 3 in the morning, the friend who put a card in the mailbox the day after the surgery. God's presence, he realized, had often looked like hands in the world, hands that carried food, hands that wrote thank you notes, hands that offered an umbrella. Mara left the next morning with a hug, her car fixed when the neighbor volunteered a tow. She left a handwritten note under a stone on his doorstep, "Thank you. I will pay it forward." It was not a theological argument that changed Ethan, it was a string of ordinary human gestures, each one a small thread weaving meaning into his days again. Slowly, an ecosystem of care surrounded him, people who did not demand answers, but offered presence. An online group of volunteers organized rides to chemo treatments, and Ethan added his name to the Rota one awkward Thursday, surprising himself when he realized he wanted to help rather than withdraw. A colleague brought his kid to match the seed tray in Ethan's kitchen because his hands, used to the rhythm of Anna's, had grown clumsy with their absence. Each time he reached toward another person, something in his chest eased. Still, the big questions were there, like an old ache in the joints. One afternoon, walking through the market, Ethan overheard a story about a family that had been turned away from the local hospital during a blackout. The mother was in labor, and due to a freak outage, the emergency ward had become overwhelmed. The town came together, someone loaned a generator, a retired midwife drove across town, and a man, a carpenter named Paul, took his lantern and kept watch over the doorway until an ambulance could get through. The smallness of the story disarmed Ethan. It sounded almost too ordinary to be true. Yet his chest tightened at the image of someone holding the light. That evening he walked slower than usual toward the riverside park, where the market lights still glowed. He found himself in front of the church, the one where he had married Anna, where their daughter Clara had been christened. The doors were open for a midweek evening service. He hesitated on the step, a familiar ritual reeling in the fog of doubt, and then, like someone testing whether they still remember how to breathe, he walked in. The sanctuary smelled faintly of lemon polish and candle wax. People were folding their hands in quiet rows. A small group was singing an old hymn he had not heard in years. Ethan sat in the back and did not close his features in judgment the way he used to, he let the room be itself. The sermon was not about miraculous healings or thunderous proofs of God's grandeur. It was about tending, about how communities care for one another, how mercy is enacted in small hands and regular hours. The preacher spoke of the gardener who tends the soil, the mother who slows to listen to a child, the neighbor who keeps a lantern lit through the night. The words were not answers, they were invitations. After the service, a woman named Hannah, someone he had not seen since his teaching days, recognized him. She came and sat beside him on the wooden pew and they talked, without the performance of old expectations. She told him of the midwife network she helped coordinate, of the meal train that had saved many people from hunger, of the retired nurse who could be called at odd hours. Ethan found himself telling her about Mara, about the cat, about the little gesture of someone leaving a note under the stone. He did not know what he meant by telling, but the act of speaking made a room inside him fuller, less echoing. Faith returned to Ethan, but not as before. It was not a full-throated certainty that expels every question. Instead, it returned like light through a pane that had been clouded, it refracted differently, more nuanced, less absolute. He realized that belief could hold questions and suffering at once, that doubting did not equate to being abandoned, that God's ways might be more often human hands than dramatic decrees. He started to go to the market more days than not for the vegetables but for the conversations. He found himself volunteering for the community health shuttle, driving elderly residents to appointments. He sat with a man called Jorge whose wife was in palliative care, and he learned the sacred skill of listening. He watered the church garden in summer and fixed the pew in the atrium when the hinge snapped. He discovered that the practice of kindness, repeated, became a kind of prayer in motion. There was a moment, quietly luminous, when the change felt irreversible. A winter storm came, the kind that shutters windows and makes the river swell with the memory of rain. The town's power grid faltered. A new mother, just returned from the hospital with a baby, found her way to Ethan's door because the midwife had told her that someone in the neighborhood could help if lights went out. Ethan lit the old camping lantern he had inherited from his father and eased the baby into a warm blanket. The little light, modest and steady, made the room safe. When the neighbors arrived with warm soup and dry towels, the small acts of many hands made a sanctuary out of a living room. That night, watching the baby sleep and listening to the quiet conversation of neighbors, Ethan felt a thing that was both grief and thanks fold into a single truth: he had not been abandoned. God had been there in the clumsy hands that wrapped the baby, in the neighbor who had lent a blanket, in the voice of the midwife who prayed a tiny blessing without spectacle. He went to bed with the lantern's glow at his window, and for the first time in a long time he opened the Bible without duty, just curiosity. He read the Psalms out loud, slowly, like someone learning to speak again. He did not fake certainty. He read, and sometimes he stopped and wept, and other times he smiled at a line that used to comfort Anna. The words were now a kind of company, sometimes sharp, sometimes mellow. They were companionable as he walked back into life. Ethan's renewed faith led to a different kind of joy, not the burst of a conversion story where everything changes at once, but a slow accrual of happiness, the feeling that life was again edible, that moments could be tasted. He laughed more easily. He let himself plan small things again, a picnic in late spring, a day trip to the sea. He reconnected with Clara in simple ways: texts, a coffee date, a postcard when he found a photograph that reminded him of Anna. The love he had had for his wife did not vanish, it became part of a larger love that included community, the rhythm of seasons, the practice of showing up. Years later, sitting on the same bench where the market smelled of bread and the river moved like a prayer, Ethan would tell the story of the lantern and the baby and the mornings that taught him how to hope again. He would say, not as a sermon but as testimony, that God had never left him, that God's presence often looks like neighborliness, like the person who shows up with soup, like the midwife who will drive across town. He told people that faith meant being willing to keep walking even when the road is wet and uncertain, because mercy keeps appearing along the way. And when someone asked him bluntly whether he had regained all certainty, he would smile and answer, "No. But I have found a peace that can hold questions." Then he would add, with a little twinkle in his eye, "And I've learned to keep a lantern on the windowsill." If there is a moral to Ethan's story, it is not a neat theological proof. It is, rather, a quiet insistence, that God's mercy often comes in low light, that the divine does not always thunder from the heavens, but bends down to tie a shoelace, to boil a kettle, to sit and listen. The grace that restores faith may wear a neighbor's coat, it may have flour on its hands and a smudged thumb. God does not turn away when our faith wanes. He continues to tend the garden, to water the roots, to keep the lantern lit, faithful in ways both ordinary and profound. For anyone who has ever felt abandoned, for anyone who has stood in a hospital corridor and wondered where God went, Ethan's life offers a steady, human answer. The one who made the world keeps walking through it, hands in the soil, tending, planting, waiting for the moment when you notice the light again. And when you do, you will find that the happiness you were given is not the erasure of sorrow, but the tender weaving of it into a life that is, once more, richly alive.